Hello, everybody. Welcome to Silent Podcast coverage of The Sympathizer. Yes, that's right. Silent Podcast is covering the HBO Max show, or maybe it's just Max now, called The Sympathizer, and we're covering it together. And by we, I would just like to say hello. I'm LaTonya Starks. For those of you all who may be familiar, may not be, excited to be here. Even more excited to be here with my co-host for this journey, Naomi Calhoun. Naomi, how are you doing?
Hello. I'm very excited to have you here with us on Silent Podcast. And I'm very excited to be talking about an HBO show that doesn't involve dragons and, or I guess children fighting with their parents. But I'm just really excited to talk about prestige television with you, LaTonya. I guess part of this is that we have to determine if this is prestige television, as HBO is known to do. But I'm really excited to be on this journey with you.
It seems pretty stagey. You know, it's got a good cast. It's directed by Park Chan-wook.
Yeah,
that's the big deal.
Easy, like that's an easy sort of bump up from like a C grade to like an A grade at the very least.
Yeah. So for those of you all who didn't know this coverage was coming, here it is. Just want to like ease you into a post show recaps world where I can basically do whatever I want. And one of the things that I want to do is to podcast a lot more on Silent Podcasts. I want to podcast a lot more with Naomi because we've had some times together, but like too far
not enough
in between. Exactly. And we've only talked about dragons. I mean, surely there must be more that we can discuss.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that I love House of the Dragon. I love talking about it both here and then with you. And I think that I think it's underreported based on how much reality television I talk about, that actually I love television and I love the medium of television for telling stories. And of course, I love books too, because The Sympathizer is based on a book and I'm excited to read it once this TV show is over, because I don't really want to spoil myself. But I love HBO. I have a real soft spot for a lot of the content they've put out there. Not just in like I love The Sopranos, even though I do love The Sopranos, but I think that they still continuously create some of the most exciting television that is out there. And I've been seeing advertisements for this show for a long time. And seeing teasers of Robert Downey Jr. playing like 10 different white guys. So I've been very excited for a very long time. And now it's finally here.
Recent Oscar winner Robert Downey Jr. just coming in and saying, I would like to do whatever I would like to do post the MCU. And what I would like to do is play 8 million white guys in a show about Asian people. So let him cook, I say. Yes. He is joined. The first episode is called Death Wish, directed by, as we mentioned before, Park Chan-wook. It stars Hwa Chande as the captain, Robert Downey Jr. as Claude, and we don't get her until episode 2, but thank God we get her. Sandra Oh is wonderful as Miss Sophia Mori. And like you said earlier, this is based on the novel The Sympathizer by Viet Thanh Nguyen, and it kind of like puts us right into the captain's shoes, right? And the captain is a half Vietnamese, half European mole for the communist fighters of North Vietnam that are embedded in the South Vietnam secret police.
Yeah.
So I just said a lot of things there. This is going to bring me to the first thing I'll say about this show was there was a little bit of a barrier to entry for me here. I had to watch this episode twice. It could be because of my advanced mental age. But I was just like, wait, who is embedded with who, and who's the mole, and who is he working for? And like, is Robert Downey Jr. a spy? Or like, what's happening? Like, it just took me a while to figure things out. But it pretty complicated and heady, like, log line for a show, don't you think?
I think that there is a barrier to entry for people who just inherently didn't absorb a lot about the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War was not something that affected me particularly. It also didn't affect my family in any way. Nobody I know fought in the Vietnam War. And so it becomes one of those things where you have to learn a lot about US history in a short period of time. It reminds me a lot of AP US history, but this time I'm actually paying attention. And it's a period of time that I think gets really glossed over as like partially because I think the United States doesn't want to focus on the loss in Vietnam, and also doesn't want to focus on all of the terrible things they did in Vietnam.
Right.
And at the same time, I think that communism just isn't discussed from a American point of view. But what I think is so telling, of course, is that they say that it's called the Vietnam War in America. It's called the American War in Vietnam. Now, the French started it, of course, as we,
right.
You know, the French
as
French
they
were
often
settlers
do.
Of South Vietnam, exactly. And something that is so interesting is that the character of the captain is not only half European, but he's half French, half Vietnamese, as they clarify later. And I think that this is entirely about the show as a whole, right, is about the duality that everybody experiences, but in particular, in this particular situation, the complete split and duality that this person, the captain, experiences in his day-to-day life. He is, in fact, a communist spy who is a high-ranking official within the South Vietnamese Special Police, and he's, you know, close with the general of the police, and his friend Bon is in the military. He's a paratrooper, and his other best friend is a high-ranking official within the communist spy network, and is in some ways his handler, although very unlikely that you would also know that your friend is a really high up there spy. But
right.
there's so many different webs of the ways that people are lying to each other, and the resentments that are building for how people are adapting to their environments, which I thought was really compelling as we got into episode 2. But, you know, that's getting way ahead of ourselves.
Yeah.
And also, just to clarify, Robert Downey Jr., Claude, is a CIA. He's part of the CIA. And so he is working in tandem with the South Vietnamese government because the American CIA supports South Vietnam against the fight with North Vietnam communists.
Yes. And just to like bring us back to that duality that you talked about earlier, the quote at the beginning of the episode is, all wars are fought twice. The first time on the battlefield, the second time in memory. And I think that that's a very interesting quote for a lot of reasons, for, you know, it being true, but also in the context of this story, we're dealing with someone who is such a dual soul living in one body, who is asked so much often about his duality, and no one ever wants to take him up on the complicated answer that he often has to give them about it. They just kind of want the tchotchke version of it. And, you know, it's also very interesting in the different ways that we're told this story, that Park Chan-wook kind of like puts out there for us to see. I mean, there are like many non-sequential flourishes that happen. We get an introduction of the captain in a North Vietnamese re-education camp with his mission. It looks like his mission is over, and that he's being forced to write and rewrite his confession, despite his insistence that everything that he did was for the North Vietnamese cause.
Right.
So he starts writing again, and he's focusing on a time starting right before the fall of Saigon, which, as we know just from pop culture, is, you know, the height of the war in Vietnam. Like, you know, just like a time that is often mentioned so much that like Miss Saigon exists in pop culture.
And it's also a piece of media, or I should say that, like, it's a time that I think has been turned into a lot of pieces of media, but always from like a very dramatic American POV. And what I noticed from a lot of the discussion of all the producers and like Robert Downey Jr. and his wife talking about making the show and all the sort of bonus features from HBO is there's a lot of discussion about like, well, how can we tell the story of the Vietnam War and the aftermath from the Vietnamese perspective? It's a little tricky because a lot of the people who are in this show in general either left Vietnam or they were born abroad to Vietnamese parents. So they don't exactly have that 100% POV, but actors like the actor who plays the general, he was like a kid when Saigon fell. And so they have these experiences either within their family or like within themselves at an early age. The author Viet left Vietnam when he was 4. You're seeing it told intentionally through the Vietnamese lens, but I think it's interesting, as all stories are, that it can't be told authentically by people who were 100% there. It's told almost like a secondhand account in a lot of ways, which is also what this story is. It's a secondhand account from the captain to begin with. It's his letters, it's his writing, and that frame to me is very interesting. I don't know how you feel, LaTonya, but I thought the frame of like he's in the camp and we're getting this all written out time after time and he's perfecting his story. To me, I was thinking like it almost just feels like it's another way of him lying and
Yes.
putting it all out there in the way that he wants it to be out there.
Exactly. We get the introduction of an unreliable narrator immediately, and that's really cool because that's also done. It's shown in a duality of ways, like it literally in flashback at times. So, yeah, everything just like synergistically is working really well at the beginning of this show, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So while he's at this re-education camp, he meets his CIA handler, Claude, who is played by Robert Downey Jr. And that is one of the 4 roles that Robert Downey Jr. is going to play throughout this series, which is, I don't know how you feel about Robert Downey Jr., but I guess I would like to hear what you think.
Well, I'm not a Marvel person, and I don't say that to
get off this podcast
to diss Marvel people. I like a lot of the early stuff, but I think that at a certain point they said, well, it's easier if we just slap Robert Downey Jr. on a green screen and build a CGI suit around him. And I think that Robert Downey Jr. is a better actor than that. And I thought he was great in Oppenheimer. He is really good when he is being his best self. It's just that sometimes like that character gets put into insanely stupid movies like The Judge and like Dr. Dolittle, where you're like, what the hell? Who told you to do this, Robert Downey Jr.? This is the opposite. This is like perfect. He's being a weirdo. He's being very like he's being coy, but also like a mentor, but also rude. And he's got all these elements to him and all these different characters that I think shows you why Robert Downey Jr. is a great actor. And I liked what they said in some of the press clips where they said that it's intentional that Robert Downey Jr. is playing so many characters because the idea is that it's so easy to say to Asian Americans, well, like you all look the same. And so the joke, of course, is that this white guy, all the white guys look the same.
Mm-hmm. That's funny. I will say I am a huge fan of Marvel. Avengers Endgame was one of the best in theater experiences I've ever had in my entire life.
Yeah, it was fun.
It was just so much fun. Robert Downey Jr. was a huge part of that. I think he was perfectly cast in Iron Man, given his own like personal history. I do think that he didn't get to do nearly as much as he could. My favorite Robert Downey Jr. performances are in movies like Kiss Kiss Bang Bang or Home for the Holidays, which is a Holly Hunter movie where he plays her brother and he just causes mayhem throughout the entirety of it. And it just makes me so happy. So whenever Robert Downey Jr. shows up to cause a little mayhem, I'm happy about it. So I'm glad that he's going to be playing 4 different roles in this show. If anyone can be that ambitious and do the most acting, it's definitely Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah, and I think it also means it's the reason that part of the reason that this story gets brought to life, right? Like he's, a producer, his wife's a producer on it. So
Yes.
I can't be mad at the idea that he helps bring this story to life in such a crazy way with a director like Director Park. And you're like, yeah, sure, go ahead. If this means Robert Downey Jr. is playing 4 wacky characters, I'm all for it.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, the South Vietnamese general witnessed this is terrible. They witnessed the interrogation of a woman who had a list of every member of the South Secret Police in her possession. And this is very vivid. Like, I love the fact that they immediately, like, I guess in the former writing of this account of the story, he wrote that they were seeing Emmanuel because it was happening at a movie theater.
Mm-hmm.
So just like the setting of a movie theater as a place of interrogation is one of the wildest things I've ever thought of in my entire life. Like, that is my happy place. That is where I go to, like, have joy. And here it's we get to see a woman getting brutally interrogated. And they changed the film to Death Wish, which is, I think, more accurate.
Well, I think that the CIA agent Claude and I, in general, I think there's a lot of discussion in this show about what is war, what are you fighting for, and when you're committing a violent act, who are you helping and who are you hurting? Mm-hmm. And then also, I think there's a larger narrative that will play out for the rest of the show, which is like, what does cinema do, and what do movies do in retelling people's stories and highlighting the suffering that people go through? So in many ways, to have like this brave spy, because she never gives up, the general never gives up, the captain is the mole. Like, what does it mean to be dedicated to your cause, and even when the spotlight is on you and you can get out, although I really doubt that if she actually gave up the captain that she would get out of that in any way.
No.
Yeah, I found it really compelling as a piece of television to have it set in this huge theater, especially for the first thing we really see of the show, and having all the rewinding and the let me retell this story. I thought it was a great, very intimidating opening scene that kept unraveling too. Like the nonlinear narrative storytelling really unraveled as time went on, and I enjoyed it.
Yes, very much so. Let's see. In a tough moment during the woman's interrogation and torture, the captain tries to think back to the last time he felt beauty and hope, which is a choice during an interrogation that you caused, and flashes back a very few days to hanging out with his friends Bon and Mon and Bon's wife and infant daughter, that are scripted to die from the second they are on the screen.
Yeah. And it really got me. Like, I did feel very whenever we see these people in their moments of suffering, this show is very skilled at making everything feel emotional, even if you don't necessarily like politically agree with the people at the time. And it's interesting. I think that they intentionally make the captain seem a lot the general seem a lot softer than they will down the line. Like, he gets to be more and more of an asshole, which I think is intentional, because I think you're supposed to feel a lot of emotions about all of these people as they reckon with like what is definitely about to happen. The baby and the wife, though, I thought everybody was also very good actors in these scenes. Like, I didn't. Mm-hmm. While obviously we are going towards a point, and that point is these characters are going to die, I didn't particularly feel like I was being. Sometimes shows just really love to be like, don't you feel sympathy for these characters? Aren't you going to be so sad down the line? And I think this show is better than that, which of course I think has a lot to do with director Park and has a lot to do with it coming from a novel and feeling much more grounded in its performances.
I mean, this did happen to people.
Yeah.
This is happening to people today.
Yes.
So Mon is another loyalist from the North, but Bon, who lost his father in a brutal attack by the North, is happy with his life in Saigon and seems unaware of his two best friends' allegiances.
Yeah. This is the schism that will continue to grow, and it's, I think, a great first beat in a story that gets progressively worse and worse as we see in episode 2. It's just going to get more intense from here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Okay. So Park's proclivities, I think, are really on display here with the concept of dualities and doubles and how perception can cause two people standing next to each other to see each other, see completely different worlds. As he begins the confession, the captain writes, "I am a man of two faces, forced to see every issue from both sides. Is such a thing in a war cowardice or survival?" It's pretty powerful.
Absolutely. Again, this is why I'm really glad that we're covering the show, is I think that it's a war show like I have never seen before.
Right. Yeah. And I think that who it's coming from probably has something to do with that. So as the premiere kind of draws to a close, the fall of Saigon is imminent. The general and the Claws haggle over an escape route, which the general insists is a temporary retreat. Another of Park's signatures, director Park's signatures here, is examining interpersonal relationships as performance. And there's a lot of kind of machismo between the general and Claude. And also just I think that Claude is being played, the smiminess of the CIA is being played well here.
Yeah, that America comes and fucks it all up and then is like, well, we'll do what we can. Yeah. I think, of course, you can be critical of America and the atrocities that the Americans did, and also understand that, at a certain point, South Vietnam is also culpable in their behaviors and their actions. And just
I won't hold those two things at the same time. I can't physically do it. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I think that the CIA loves I'm like, what should I say about the American CIA on the podcast?
Live.
I think we're seeing a lot of what the CIA does in places that they enact military actions, and then they like to sort of make a mess and leave. And Claude feels like a very interesting symbol of that as we're watching this episode. And I don't know how you feel. I want to know how you feel, LaTonya, about Madam, about the general's wife, because I think that she's a really fascinating character that is definitely gonna flash more later on. But I was so interested in her in these past 2 episodes, and I'm kind of dying to see more from her.
Yes, just doing really well at playing. I can't believe that you've gotten us into another one of these situations, and now I am about to be murdered in the middle of the night because of you, right? And now I have to make sure that myself and my child survive. because of you. Just really playing a great military wife for our times.
The classic military wife role. That, and also, of course, I think we're seeing a lot of
Kai
Vietnamese
Duyen,
culture.
I believe is Madam's the name of the woman that plays Madam.
Mhm.
Just want to get her name out there. Kai
Yeah.
Duyen. Fantastic.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of Vietnamese culture, and not only culture like visual culture or like practices, but also things like how they have to save their entire family and how everyone's extremely worried about their. I mean, you would be worried about your family too, but your entire extended family. And these scenes, I just felt like they were short, they were snappy, even with the voiceover. Voiceover sometimes can be very like, okay, we get it. Thank you for the point of the entire show. And
Right.
I feel like the voiceover in this is obviously based in the fact that it's a book and there's this narration within the story, but I don't feel like it's overkill, and I think that we are still allowing the actors in the scenes to speak for themselves in a very like concise way rather than being over explained.
Yeah, for sure. I also just think that it's just like the rest of this episode is basically just a ridiculously long action shot into like different types of like planes, trains, automobiles kind of thing. And it's horrifying that that is someone's reality, because that is the thing that has happened.
Of
And
course.
and and is still happening. And to just think of what you would do to survive in those circumstances, when just you being born of two different races was already such a big deal in your life. Like it's just, it really speaks to um what I believe we'll forgive this main character for eventually.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that we are absolutely teed up for, in the future episodes, a show about. Okay, so I've also been watching Fallout. I don't know if you've been watching Fallout, but there is a sort of thesis about that show, which is like, are you going to want the same things after
Mhm.
you've gone on your journey, after you have gone through what the wasteland does to you? And I think it's a very similar sentiment for the captain. Is, are you going to want the same things when you come out the other side? And I don't know where this is going, but I am really looking for that story as we continue on, because I think it's the main conceit of the show. Is how can you be all of these things at once? How can you
Right.
do terrible things to people in the name of the cause, and then also enjoy the luxuries that are the exact antithesis of the cause? We see Claude bringing him, albums, and bringing the whiskey and all these things that are like symbols of, I think, American capitalism
Mhm.
that the captain enjoys and indulges in. And whether that's for the act of being a spy, of presenting this mask, or is it something that he actually enjoys?
Right. Um so let's see. Um we get a lot of duality here. We are seeing that the fall of Saigon is imminent. Um,
I want to ask you, because I saw a lot of internet discussion about this, and
uh-huh.
you know, the historical events are the historical events. The TV show is the TV show, right?
Yeah.
What did you think of the visuals and the way this was filmed? Because I've seen a lot of debate online about people have a lot of different opinions about the visuals of this show in this episode.
Really? I thought it felt incredibly realistic. And I've kind of been sitting with that fact that um it felt really visceral. Like, and I think that the sound was done really well. Like the sound design was done well, because you kind of like got the whole like there's danger on all sides kind of thing. We're not sure exactly what's going to happen next. We're just trying to make it out at like the best with the best information we've been given by, I guess, America. Yeah, I found them really compelling, and I love the that it's not full of so much color. There's like a din to it almost, but then when the bombs start to actually build up, because they start very far away, right?
Yeah.
And then everything's just getting closer and closer and closer, and suddenly you're in it. And we see those like explosions and those oranges. I think it really like plays well against the emotional backbeat of the show.
Absolutely. There were things like the POV helicopter shot that eventually gets taken down that I was really surprised by. The way that it ended, I was really taken by the last scene. I thought that obviously it looks a little CGI. They filmed this in Thailand. Like this is the inherent movie making process. An HBO show, a show where you only have a certain VFX budget per episode. That's how it is. And I'm not going to give them too much flack because it's not a multi-million-dollar movie like Ant-Man and Quantumania, which looks like absolute fucking garbage. I did think that
have people been saying that this is bad or something?
You know, I've seen it both ways. I've seen people saying, "Oh, it looked really nice," and this is mostly me just like popping into Reddit and all this stuff.
Oh,
people have said both it looks really nice and also that it looks really bad. And I think it depends on A, if you have a basis in knowing what Saigon actually looks like, and B, the CGI to me, the CGI that stood out as bad was in episode 2 when the plane door was open in the back and they were like sort of sitting there. Obviously, it's an emotional scene, but I'm watching it being like the plane door is open and nobody's hair is moving. Like there is zero wind and the sort of feathering, but that's all like
they canceled the wind.
They canceled the winds. It's all these things where it's like that's a minute detail and that doesn't take me out of the story and out of a very sad moment. But that was the one time where I was like, oh, I can see it here. But it's I'm going to say this. I think that people don't realize that VFX also go into things like, Sandra Oh. How old is Sandra Oh? Because Sandra Oh says in this show that she's 46, like the character.
What a rude question.
Sandra Oh? Sandra Oh is 52. You know what I mean? Not too far off. Not too far off. But things like Robert Downey Jr.'s makeup, if it looks a little funky, it needs VFX. If Sandra Oh wants to look a little bit younger to whatever, it goes into that. Like, there are all of these things that involve VFX that I think people don't realize involve VFX. So then a larger scale comp like them in the plane just might be lacking because there's so much to do throughout the entire episode, especially things like making California seem, 50 years younger at this point. All these elements that need to happen to make the American scenes feel more realistic might take away from something like that. So I'm not going to harp too harshly on it, knowing that, we're delivering a story more than we are delivering a spectacle.
Yeah. I all I got from that is that you think that the special effects are going to make Sandra Oh look better.
Listen, anybody who's listening who thinks that celebrities don't use VFX to make themselves look better, you're lying to yourselves. And it's like, it is the way of the industry now. Like, if you thought airbrushing on magazines was bad, think again. But zip. She still looks good though. Sandra Oh has a beautiful canvas to work with. There's nothing wrong with that.
She looks wonderful.
Gorgina.
Yeah, Gorgina. So all right. Basically, we get to the end of the Vietnam War. And it is horrifying in every way that you think it could be. A convoy makes for an air base. The bus barrels up the runway toward an air craft. Bombs start raining down on a tarmac, one hitting the bus. Bodies are kind of strewn in every direction as the survivors make their way to the plane on foot. As a helicopter is hit, it crashes to the ground and bursts into an apocalyptic flaming debris. And it kills Bond's wife and child.
Yeah.
We knew it was going to happen, but oh my gosh, that was terrible.
There's not like a lot to say in terms of like narrative. I thought it was extremely sad, and I actually kind of didn't see it coming 100%. But LaTonya, I'm curious how you feel about Bond as a character. I think we saw a lot of Bond developing over the past couple episodes, and he feels like a firecracker. I feel very nervous about where he's gonna go.
Concerned.
Yeah.
The man just lost his wife and child, and he saw it happen, and he made it out. So he's got survivor's guilt on top of everything else. And his best friend is a spy. He's processing a lot right now, and he needs some time. And I am concerned what he might turn his attentions to.
Yeah, he's definitely becoming this level of antagonist that we see in a lot of shows. The best friends who fall apart because they choose different sides. I don't think it's an uncommon trope, but what I appreciate about this show, and I don't know how you feel, is that emotions feel justified, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a level to which I think the captain knows this too, that he can't look at his friend and say like, well, why do you feel this way? He knows exactly from the get-go. He's like, yeah, his father was killed. Like, I understand why he has such anti-communist sentiments.
Yeah.
His wife and child are dead. He understands it entirely. And I think that is why the show is called The Sympathizer, right? That he has sympathies for everybody around him who experiences these horrible things at the behest of people maybe like Claude and the general, who can't understand where the other side is coming from. And that when you lose little people, when you lose people like Bond to a cause, it becomes more obvious that like this is just a toll that everybody is experiencing. Whether it's, a positive for your side or a negative for your side, people are suffering.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see exactly where this goes. I know that we're going to talk about it more in episode 2, but just setting it up there is really terrible. I do have to say that it is going to take a lot for me to not want to giggle a little bit every time we talk about the main character, because his name is the Captain, and that's just a little funny.
If they give us a name, we'll say a name, but I don't think they've given us a name, which I actually didn't even really realize until we were sort of talking about the episode and reading the recaps and being like, oh shit. But also the general, maybe they say his name, but like I think they just call him the general too.
Yeah.
Which I'll take. I think that it's interesting. I think to have a historical fiction, sometimes when the characters have names, it almost feels more real, or it feels like, oh, this person actually existed when this person did not exist. This general did not exist. He's based on other generals that certainly did behave ways in the war. But I saw this with a little bit with Zone of Interest, where it's specifically based on a Nazi officer, and I think people are misinterpreting that to mean that this is like the truth about who this person was, or truth about like the actions he took in particular, like the historical accuracy of it. And so I almost like it more from a POV of like, this is an amalgamation. This is just not something that actually happened, but I am showing you like what happened in a very general sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What we do get from the very end of this episode is that Bond essentially becomes catatonic for a while. Like that's it. For him functioning for a bit. And then we see kind of like tears falling down the prisoner's face. the end of episode 1.
It's tough. Gosh, it's tough to talk about in a way where you're like, well, that was really powerful. Like, it was just a really powerful episode. You know, I think a lot of TV these days is meant to be like shock value, whatever. I think this is just a tough episode because it feels extremely grounded in like what happened in Vietnam and also very prescient of what's happening today. So when you watched it twice, LaTonya, what did you gain from the second time around? What do you think caught your eye that maybe you hadn't captured the first time?
I think that just the like getting into the narrative, the way that it was being narratively told to me, that it was like being done during a flashback, and it's kind of like a flashback within a flashback thing, was something that I had to make sure that that I could deal with. Like I watched it the first time and I was like, I'm not sure if this is too stylistic for me. Because sometimes that happens where there's like too much style over function and I can't get into it. Or over substance, I mean, and I can't get into it. But I feel like this is doing a good job of marrying the style and the substance in a way that I like. So I'm excited about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we're going to talk about episode 2, but first we're going to take a break. So stay here. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back to talk about episode 2. Stay with us. Hey, everybody, welcome back to our review recap of The Sympathizer. LaTonya, let's talk about episode 102 titled Good Little Asian. We start back at the re-education camp. The warden sort of saying, this is so Hollywood, this is so cinematic. And again, I think this is the theme of the show, on top of course, all of the themes about dichotomy and hiding your true self, is also the Hollywoodification of a real tragedy that people went through.
Yes, for sure. Just the way that capitalism works, and that is what they were fighting for, I guess. Was just the right to, sell the rights to things like this. Yeah, it's a very interesting look at who gets to own history and why.
Who gets to own history and why? I mean, obviously, it's a sentiment that is brought up. It's a great way of phrasing it.
Thank you. So yeah, Good Little Asian. First things first. Bond's wife and child are dead. Good Lord.
And he's carrying. I mean, this. We play around with the timeline a little bit of how the scene is happening. It did reach a point where I was like, wow, it's a lot of people, yelling out of the back of the plane, and it's like it's really going quite long. But then when they were running and holding them, I was just so moved by the scene.
Yes. Really, really moving. You very much get I just like the look at the little foot, because I mean, I have two nephews. Like, I'm familiar with what it's like to hold a fat little baby and just be like, I love this fat little baby. And the idea that a child would die in that way is just so senseless, and so it's just not fair to anyone. And then having to witness it happen along with the love of your life, it's one of the things that could like try the soul or completely obliterate the soul. So it's just really interesting to sit with here. The captain's prison commander calls it out on the reading of his version of the confession. Past, present are seeming to blend, which is very interesting because, again, that is the way that the story is told. The captain is now in his POW cell writing out his full account, and the captain is driving through the desert in Oklahoma, where he's sprinting Bond across the tarmac to get him out of the last plane of Saigon. And all of these scenes happen within seconds of each other, and we barely even have context for the first couple of them. But it's just all the unfathomable ways that people survive war, and what they have to leave behind.
Oh, absolutely. And I think what I was left with from episode 2 in particular, because I think episode 1 is really about where everybody is starting from, these horrible events that are happening to everybody around them. Episode 2 is really about how you handle it and what you are doing. And I think we see this duality extremely closely between the captain and his friend Bond of you have come out of this crucible, and how do you respond, and how are you feeling? And I think that the captain is somebody who is so used to not actually acknowledging his real emotions that he can't really process any of the emotions that he is feeling, because I think he's elated that North Vietnam has won. He's so sad for Bond, but he's also kind of happy to be in America. And I think he has all of these different extremely conflicting emotions happening to him at once, that he almost comes across as like, I don't feel anything. In these scenes where he's trying to motivate Bond, or Bond is seeing him, sleep with Sandra Oh's character, Sophia, you can tell that he's just sort of moving on in a way that Bond cannot possibly comprehend, because it doesn't make any sense to him that their whole homeland was just destroyed and he feels nothing.
Yeah. It takes like a very special person to not be a Bond, essentially. In the face of losing all of that, anyone else would just kind of collapse. So it takes a very unique person, and we got that in the captain. So they're over in a refugee camp in America, and the general is trying to cling to authority, which is kind of hilarious.
Well, this whole scene, it's kind of the delusion of like politicians and generals and military men of like, oh, well, I'm really noble. Well, your suit means nothing here. And there's a lot of discussion in the show about like, well, why are they mad at me? But I also think that there's all the reasons that are stated in the show. There's also this reason of like, you don't mean anything here, and like, how dare you try and assert your hierarchy onto this new world where we don't have to listen to you anymore. What did you think of this scene?
I just could not get over them like hiding in a bathroom.
Oh God.
Like,
God, bathroom scenes I hate. I just watched, you know what I watched recently was Slumdog Millionaire. You know, there's like a scene in the bathroom and that ugh. I really wish those set
no,
pieces could be left out of things.
I agree, because it just gets into your mind, and you're just like, oh my gosh, it must smell so terrible in there. Why are we doing this?
Ugh.
But yeah, him trying to cling to power, and his wife is being hilarious the entire time as well. She's just like, I guess this is where we live now. And we're eating this food. Like, this is what people think food is. Which would be enough to piss me off, honestly. If I came from someplace like Vietnam and then I had to eat the food in America, like because they had me in a war camp, I'd be like, great, thanks.
Well, actually, something we kind of forgot to mention in episode 1, that will the character of the dumpling, like the dumpling officer, and also, God, that horrible thing he said in episode 1 where he chose to leave his baby behind with the nanny
Oh my
so that he could
gosh.
take his mother with him instead of his child, take his wife and his. First of all, it's crazy that the wife sort of lets that go, but then the mother is brought up again in this episode of like, she didn't want to leave. And I do think that there is another theme to look out for in this show is, would I have been better off back home? What am
Yeah.
I missing and craving from my homeland? And also, what is a homeland? We hear the character Sunny say later of like, you can only have one homeland. You can only come from
Yeah.
one place. What did you think of that storyline of the dumpling and this officer character in general?
I This is the one who's like eating durian in the middle of the
Yes, we see him a lot.
interrogation, right? I'm just like, dude, get it together. Like, please get it together. No one should have to deal with your crap.
Durian smells awful.
Yes, you should not. That's not something that you should bring to work and make everyone smell. What are you doing?
Well, I guess it's torture in some ways.
Yeah.
But then again, these lines that what I always dislike in a TV show is when it feels like episode to episode there is no narrative connection, and it feels like it's forgetting a lot of what it established earlier. I have to say, look, it's fine, but I didn't really like True Detective season 4. I don't know if you watched True Detective season 4.
I did, yeah. We did a versus on it.
I did not. Well, I also kind of did my own private verses in that my boyfriend and I rewatched season 1, and season 1 is so incredible. It's incredible television. And season 4 just did not do it for me. I did not. I sort of walked away at the end being like, that was it. And what I think I can see in the Sympathizer is that things that are established in episode 1 carry over to episode 2. Don't feel like, oh, look at this clue. It's just, oh, he likes durian. He's excited to see durian. Or that, his mother is brought up again in this episode because we remember the scene with the mother. And that this show is really good about like carrying over narrative threads that are established. Now, this might be because it's based on a book and that an author would, of course, make sure to things over. That's all you have is the scenes you establish early on. But I'm glad that it's not a show where I feel like the loose ends are just loose ends or words are being thrown at me that don't mean anything,
Right. Because he is, and we'll get to this, but he is the one who is ultimately implicated as the mole, right?
He's the fall guy, yeah.
Yeah. Which, I could do without like a larger person being slovenly character. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I could do without it. But
this is also, 1970s.
I was gonna say this is like the usual suspects of who you think might be like, the mole. Like so here you go.
Well, it's also, I think, with this character, there's this larger sentiment that they talked about in the first episode of like the captain was trying to bring over people that were incompetent. I don't think he ever thought he was going to bring somebody over to be his fall guy, but it's so interesting how I think people really live and die by his sword unknowingly, and that this character lived by his sword and now will die by his sword, that the captain can just make this decision for self-preservation in a lot of ways too.
Yeah. But that also some part of him had to be like, I really don't like this guy. He's really getting on my nerves. And I don't think he's a good person. So I think I'm going to set him up.
Yeah.
Because I do think that some of this is calculated because it's possible for us to like the captain, but it's also possible for the captain to be a psychopath.
I mean, you have to be kind of psychotic in this way to allow for such compartmentalization within yourself,
yes.
Right? I think that's another great point. Like, LaTonya, how do you feel about this main character? You and I, I'm sure, have spent a lot of time with main characters who are bad people, right?
Yes.
Who are the what is it? Not the protagonist. What's the fucking word?
The antagonist?
I guess the anti-hero. What's the word when the protagonist is a bad guy? I can't even think of it
the
right
antagonist.
Now. No, but like that, it's like the Walter White. This is listen, we didn't have this is bad. Protagonist is bad. What is this called? Like, never mind. Don't worry about me. But what I'm saying is that we spend a lot of time with main characters who are really the villains of their own story. And how do you feel about the captain in terms of his villainy, or what we can excuse as his actions that he needs to take that are necessary for his survival? I feel like we haven't seen all of it yet, of course.
Yeah, I believe partially I believe that this performer is playing this like he's like James Bond in a way. Because he's kind of writing up his own exploits, right?
Yes, that's a good point.
He's probably showing himself in the best light, and like one of the best lights you can show yourself is that you were able to like get with Sandra Oh, who I think we should mention is a really big part of this episode. This is we meet Sandra Oh through another Robert Downey Jr. character. Professor Hammer, who, is very upset that the department is going to have to be called Asian Studies. So, he's like that. I think Robert Downey Jr. is just playing different types of racists in this show.
I think that's, that's the 1970s, that's like, this is, we like, the civil rights movement, like literally like just happened in America. And also that, we're only we're a couple decades out from the end of World War II. Like, I
Yeah.
think that
Ugh.
it reminds me a lot of, did you watch Mad Men when like,
I did.
Bert was like super into like Asian art and stuff when he opened his office? It reminded me of the Mad Men office. But that we're entering this new time period where we're exchanging with Japan in a new way. And yeah, that we as white people, like that white people sort of say like, yeah, we're going to be experts on this, and we're going to have
Right.
more authority to tell. And his patronizing comments to Sophia about like, you should really learn your language. Again, that's what the show is about, right? Is people saying this is who you are, and everybody, especially Asian people and Asian people in America, saying you don't know who I am, you have no idea who I am, and I will
Mhm.
not conform to what you want me to be. Or on the other hand, it turns to the captain being like, oh yeah, you know exactly who I am.
Yeah.
You've got everything figured out, don't question anything.
Miss Sandra Oh plays Miss Sophia Mori, a middle-aged Japanese American secretary who develops a sexual relationship with the captain. I mean, congratulations to her, really. Like, she looks great. He's gorgeous. So good job, Sandra Oh. Making good decisions as usual.
I
That's what
mean,
I think.
Sandra Oh is like, she's so good in this episode. I think that she really jumps out as well. I think we're seeing a lot of characters from Vietnam, or like the Asian characters in the crowd when we had that big party scene where they're not really getting a lot, especially the refugee. You're seeing a lot of Asian characters who don't have any dialogue and are just sort of there as like part of the scene. And we're so focused at first on the police officers and the military, um, that it's so interesting to finally see the very like Americanized Asian perspective that she is bringing. And very clearly, the captain likes this. He really indulges in this side of it. And again, this is about like the indulgences of American capitalism. What if you can just be an American? That's what he's accused of by Mon in the last episode, is that like, I think you actually really like America and you don't want to admit
Yeah.
it, which
Yeah.
is, of course, as we see, very true. He loves
He
America in a
loves
lot of ways.
America.
Um,
And it's not his first time in America, also.
yes, he was there in college, and it makes a lot of sense that he would. I like this narrative tie of this sponsor brings him back. What did you think of this great line from Claude, and this drama kind of with the general of that the captain gets out of the refugee camp before the general because
Mhm.
of his connection, but that Claude doesn't put enough effort into getting the general out quickly. And then we learned from Claude later that it's like, I did that intentionally. He needs to be grateful for America. What did you think of all this?
It sounds exactly like something that someone from the CIA would say,
Yeah.
like the fact that there's like an idealized version of like a race as well, whereas like, because our captain is like half white, he maybe like deserves better treatment as well. It can also be a thing. But yeah, I thought that was a really interesting line, and something that makes so much sense for that character to say.
Oh yeah. And also that, it shows America. It should what a powerful snake America is in all of this.
Yes.
They're behind the scenes. They don't actually, do they actually care about the Vietnamese people? I mean, it's general. Like, I do think the general needs to be humbled in a lot of ways. But
Yeah,
do
seriously.
they actually care, or do they just care about stopping communism to promote American capitalism?
Mhm.
Um, all great questions that I think will be examined probably more thoroughly in this show about the, literal Vietnam War. Can we talk about Professor Hammer for a second? This like Robert Downey Jr.
Yes,
character number 2.
please.
What?
Yes.
Okay, so I was reading a little bit more because I think that some people have valid criticisms that it does feel kind of like a vaguely offensive, effeminate character.
It does.
And I looked into it more, and the author said like this is based on a professor that I like knew in California who like fetishized Asian people, and it's interesting because I'm watching him like, yeah, it does feel offensive. And this guy also says, yeah, it's based on a real person. And I'm like, I didn't enjoy it quite as much as Claude as a character. I don't know how I was very mixed about this. How did you feel?
Yeah, I thought that it was like, let's maybe not do this. Like, just because it's based on someone real doesn't mean that you have the ability to do that thing that was real about them. So I don't feel great about the characterization and like the whole effeminate nature of the character. I feel better about the like Asian fetishization thing is definitely there. The way that he feels like he can immediately give the captain homework and tell him to like write out the two different parts, like the things about the two different sides of him racially. Also, he can become like essentially a parlor trick later is wild. Like, that is a wild thing to do as a character.
I don't know. It's I enjoyed the like, let's say like the overarching symbols and themes of like this character and like the UCLA, giving him like this uptight Vietnamese, outfit to wear and putting Sandra Oh in a kimono is like, yeah, I like the sentiment that like Asian people are completely misunderstood by people who claim to understand Asian people. And yet the character still felt a little like, oh my gosh, like this is like, I hope we don't stick around with this character too much throughout the course of the series. I would
He
really
was just doing a Harvey Firestein impersonation
with a John Waters mustache. Yeah.
So, I guess like awards were won at some point for Liberace. That doesn't mean that, never mind. So, yeah. Robert Downey Jr.'s Professor Hammer. Sandra Oh works in Professor Hammer's office. Sophia Mori is an administrator. And yeah, a bunch of racism happens. That's fun. That's a party, apparently. Like, he got angry. Professor Hammer got angry when the captain actually had an answer for his duality like question that was well thought of and not something that was just like listing the differences in himself. He was just like, oh, I wasn't expecting creative thoughts. No, don't ruin my party.
Just say that you have like not brown eyes, yeah.
Exactly.
and the party trickery of it all is such a good point. He wants, especially because it's like, oh, this was my former student who has now just come back. And again, this person just experienced like the horrors of a literal war. And he's like, oh my God, tell us the differences between you. It does kind of reach a point of people are willingly sort of ignoring the actual harm that's happening overseas in favor of just sort of parading around somebody who came from Vietnam, being like, wow, you had such a crazy time. We see this in a lot of war movies, right? When, soldiers coming home, all that stuff. And I think it's a similar sentiment.
Yes, for sure. It's just very interesting to see it from this particular party scene. A party scene wherein we learn the reason that the captain doesn't eat cephalopods.
Oh yeah, we gotta talk about this.
What?
I mean, look, it's in the book. It's not like it's just some crazy ass shit. Like it's in the book.
That makes it okay.
It makes it less random, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody did say it is a metaphor in a lot of ways for like the fact that the captain can really just kind of stomach anything, which I guess is true. And the author said he was inspired by when he wrote this, like some of the more like sex romp books that existed of the time. It's crazy that the show can just go from like the literal tragedies of the Vietnam War to like a scene like this. It's absolutely bananas.
It's ridiculous.
This is also kind of like the first time we see his mother on screen portrayed in any way. And I was like, what the hell?
She's gorgeous.
Yeah. And we'll see more from, it's mentioned that he has a white father and an Asian mother, and that we'll find out more about I think his history and his family background, but we don't really get a lot about Mom this episode.
Mm-hmm. That's true. The only thing that we really get about Mom this episode is discussion about how all of the women that he's been with has been like his mother in some way, with Sandra Oh post-coitus, which is another thing that happened in this show. This show is wild.
Yeah, we really go all over the place. And it's also funny how Sandra was just like, oh, you fucked a squid. Okay, anyways, like she doesn't really give a shit either, which is hilarious. I thought the sex scene was interesting. Again, we're really seeing in this episode like a lot of the indulgences that he's making emotionally, whether that's with Sandra Oh or that's with avoiding his duties, working with the general. I thought there's a parallel there of he's trying to just enjoy his time now, and go back to being like, I don't really care, and I'm just gonna spy. But he's almost trying to get out of his duties. I think we didn't mention it really, that like he was surprised to be told that he's going to America. He thought he could sort of revel in he says it like, I don't have to go to the re-education camps, right? And they're like, yeah, you don't, which is, of course, lie. But he's delusional in that way, that he thinks that he doesn't have to go to this experience.
Yeah. It's delusional in several ways. But one of them got to be about having sex with a cephalopod. So, good Lord. Calm down, men, first of all. Like, I think that's the lesson that we get from that. It's just calm down.
I mean, it's Sandra Oh. What are you going to do?
You
going to be calm?
No, probably not. No. That's a really good point. I do love how she's just kind of like fun, like I'm here for excitement and good times. Like that's just kind of her character. She just seems like she always looks great. She gets to wear some really great shoes and boots in this show. And she's always like post orgasm every time we see her. It's wonderful.
Yeah. And I thought she did a lot of good acting. I think she's a great counter to what we have seen so far, and I think she's going to be a great counter to him down the line, because we know she's a no bullshit kind of person. This character Sophia, and so it's really just about like, at first he's charming, the captain is charming. When is his bullshit going to wear off? When is he going to be not so charming, not so entertaining, and she's going to be like, I know that you're hiding something from me. This is such a classic, right? Like I know you're hiding something from me. What are you hiding? You know what this show reminds me a lot of in some ways is it reminds me of Barry a lot.
Really?
Just in that Barry has this whole really quiet personal life or quiet secret, he was a hitman life that he is trying to hide from everybody in order to be something that he wants to be. And I think that in a lot of ways, the captain wants to be an American or wants to be this like free thinking academic. I listen to jazz. I'm really open minded. I have premarital sex. Like wants to be sort of a lot of what is happening in the 70s in America. But that is, I would say, not what communist Vietnam wants from him. And also, I think he's silly to think that it would be something that can fly in communist Vietnam in a lot of ways post-war. So yeah, it's just fascinating in his character. Makes me think of Barry a lot.
I also think that if they believe for a second that Sandra Oh doesn't know what they are talking about when they're speaking in other languages, then they're being dumb. Like it just seems like she's going to, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if she were a spy because she's so awesome,
Interesting. I think there has to be another spy in the world that he'll encounter. I wonder if it'll be her or somebody else. I'm excited to see where his relationship goes with a lot of the fringe characters, like the Madam. I'm excited to see, and the Sunny character that we're introduced to. But did you love the scene where the student talks to him? The student where he sort of says like he's interviewing him about coming from Vietnam.
Yes. That was adorable. I thought that scene was so cute.
Cute.
It just seemed like it was I just felt like this is an interview that could be happening today. Like their looks felt very current, even though they are obviously from the 1970s. That's what I meant by cute. Like it just feels like people would be dressed like that today to have like interviews like that.
That's funny.
But yeah,
everything's back in style again now, isn't it?
It is. It definitely is. Yeah, it was kind of, again, we have to remember that this is the captain writing this whole thing. So like he's going to portray himself in the best light. And like I said, it kind of feels like he's being James Bond a little bit. So it feels like the he gives the coolest possible answers that he could to these questions.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I also think that it is this sentiment that I think a lot of the show is about, which is, do you think as an American you understand my perspective? Do you think you can fully comprehend like what I've just gone through and what has happened to me? And the answer is obviously absolutely fucking not. You can't understand. But I think at the same time, it's so complicated for him where it's so easy for American students to say like, I am in support of X. And the reality is just that life isn't like that, it's very complicated. And you can have sympathy for all people involved, as the title, I think, suggests. But at the same time, the students are doing what the students can, like, if you're protesting, if you're not joining the American side of the war, like, are you inherently doing something? I think you are. Of course, it's just that he is, I think, so jaded at this point by other people claiming that they understand what he's been through,
Yeah. It was very much interesting to see that perspective, especially given like the Americanized perspective that you get from like history books about the Vietnam War. So this was pointing out another duality, of course. They have loved that theme. So let's see. The general finally gets to get sponsored. He finally gets his papers or whatever, and he decided that he's going to open a liquor store. someone immediately like vandalizes the liquor store. So the captain has to be the one to clean all of that up. And they have this massive party, kind of being like, you may not like me, but I have alcohol. And I'm going to sell you alcohol now. So it seems like no matter what the captain is, or sorry, no matter what the general is, doing pretty well.
Well, he's rebounding in this way that is almost like him coming back into power. I think for a while he was out of power in the refugee camp, and he was not being taken seriously by the captain as a threat. But as we know from their letters and their secret exchanging of messages, that that the general is not to be underestimated. And I like that what this show so far has done is underestimate the general. That we feel like he's so reliant on the captain for everything. We feel like he has no idea what's going on around him, and he trusts the captain wholeheartedly. But that's just a bit of a ruse. That's just a bit of a way to make you feel like you know everything that's going to happen with the captain, and that's not the case. It's not just going to be like that. And I think the captain and the audience is in for a rude awakening if they keep underestimating. There's this graffiti on the side that's an allusion to terrible things that happened in Vietnam by the South Vietnam Army, and the general is just like, I didn't do that. It wasn't me. And the captain is also like, oh no, don't worry about it. Like, everyone is sort of not acknowledging the truth, and also just being like, let's just move on. And it's going to be a mistake for the captain, certainly.
Yeah, for sure. The idea of there needing to be like a lineup to figure out who the mole is happens at this super fun and normal party.
A super fun and normal party where you yell, kill all the vermin, and you pledge your allegiance to a country that has just been militarily collapsed. Casual
party. Yeah. So there happens to be a lineup. Do you think that there's any credence to the fact that Bond went before the captain in the lineup?
I think because there's that moment, right, where they say, like, your name came up. I think that if anybody is going to be the, like, wrench in the plans, it's going to be Bond. That just feels narratively like a place it could go.
Mm-hmm.
But also that he is seeing the captain. I think the captain's almost like letting loose around him a little bit more because he's his friend. And I think that that's a mistake. You can't risk the vulnerability of it around somebody that you care about, because they're just going to, especially him, he seems so focused and so observant. It just seems like a bad idea.
Yeah.
That's going to get worse.
Yeah. So the captain, who is just like, yep, lying is fun, decides to throw Major on under the bus. And the general and Claude mention that the captain's name was brought up by another person, and they all kind of laugh it off. So Mr. I eat durian during, work functions, and choose my mother over my daughter, is the one who we should feel sorry for, I guess, for a little bit.
I think that what it shows to me, it almost feels like the Game of Thrones style, where it's like, if you get complacent or if you piss off the wrong people, you're going to be fucking head on the chopping block. And that, the intense pressures of both war and politicking have not dissipated simply because you live in America now. And at the same time, what's in your best interest is probably getting the fuck away from these people. Like, I think that some people are clinging to the general as an idea that, like, oh yeah, we're going to go back and we're going to get power. And honestly, this is all going to change in a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that's going to change at all. I mean, obviously we know from a societal historical standpoint that doesn't change at all. But I'm curious to see if the general does manage to gain more power as he has people around him, or if his power is going to collapse as, you know, the Southern chances of retaking Saigon and Vietnam basically don't change.
Good Lord.
Mm.
I mean, the general, what a ridiculous person.
Of course.
Just
But that's
so,
why he's a great character. Is
yeah, so self-important in so many different ways.
self-important, and also I think played really well, acted really well by the
Mhm.
actor. I enjoyed his performance a lot. I felt like it wasn't over the top. Like it didn't I didn't feel like he was an idiot. I just felt like what we eventually come to hear from Mon, which is like he's being underestimated, and it's because he's in such a different time where like things are going badly and he just needs to get the F out. Um, but that scene where he was getting pelted with food and the women are yelling about how their sons died because of him,
Mhm.
um, it it connected a lot to me about what the college student interviewer was saying of like, well, we care about the people of Vietnam. And it's like, that's true, but there's not a lot that you can do when people are going into armies to fight wars that, you know, you can't help a mother who like lost her child. That's just how it is. Um, and that's what I think this show is really trying to show in a lot of ways is this different narrative than what we typically see of either like an American
Mhm.
soldier or a Vietnamese woman. Like I feel like we see so many of those perspectives, but we really rarely see, I think, POV from just straight up a Vietnamese person
Mhm.
who experienced this at the time.
Tone Lay is the actor who plays the
Mhm.
general. So doing fantastic. Um so yeah, it seems like the captain still cares about his friend. Um and Bon is like just getting really drunk and watching a lot of like, people hitting people. You know,
Mhm.
it's not a good place. Like he hasn't showered in forever, he just doesn't really care about living. So it's interesting to see what it is that he will end up doing.
Yeah, that's where we leave off this episode. And again, it sort of feels like this next step of like, hey, we need to do this together. Will this make Bond less certain of, will this make him more certain about how his friend is a sympathizer, or will it change their POV? I'm very curious to see. I don't know. I really don't know. And that's what I like is I don't want to read the book. I don't want to know what's going to happen next. I
Yeah,
just want to
me
be
either.
taken each week. And I'm glad that we're covering the show together because I feel like we're going to explore a lot of really interesting ideas via the medium of television, my favorite medium.
Yay. This is great. Um, this went really well. I'm
Yeah,
glad that
I'm
we're
so
doing
glad to do
this.
this.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I guess why don't you tell us what you have going on
Let's
other outside of this?
Yeah, let's talk about it. What's going on Silent Podcast right now? We have amazing Big Brother Canada coverage. Don't forget to tune in to that each and every week. Myself and Sarah Carradine are talking about Taskmaster UK Series 17. And of course, Sarah and Sean will start talking about Taskmaster Australia once that gets booted back up. Really excited for that season as well. You can also listen to myself and Gia and Nicole talk about Top Chef. We're doing a double episode. We had to take a break last week. Our schedules were not in sync. And so we had to skip last week's drama, but that means we have twice the
Ugh.
drama to talk about this week. Episodes 5 and 6 recap coming very, very soon. You can also check everything out in our, I don't know, we just get a lot going on Silent Podcast. You know what I mean? Like give us a 5-star rating. You like us, we like you. All the traders coverage, all the circle coverage, all the challenge coverage that Katie is doing. I mean, it's just amazing. So stay tuned right here on Silent Podcast. LaTonya, what's up with
Yes.
you?
I am launching a thing over with Brazilian Dragon, and it's going to be called Pop Cultured.
Yes.
And it's going to take over the old Versus feed. So that's going to be coming. Hopefully we will be doing a podcast about a little movie that's out. That's all I will say. You can also find me on the Recap Kickback. That was really fun to get back together again with Mari and Chappelle. And we talked about the American Society of Magical Negroes. And, oh, God, that was terrible. But
everyone had a lot of strong feelings about it. That's what I could tell.
It was really fun to talk about. And then you can find me talking about Top Chef on the Top Chef for Hap Up. I got to meet some of the people that listen to the podcast, and I was very excited to see them. I could not believe that people actually recognized who I was at the Bryson Nguyen event. That was cool.
I believe it.
But yeah, we just covered episode 6. That should be out today, I think. And oh God, what a ridiculous episode of television.
Yeah, it was a hard week for the Top Chefers out there.
Gosh, but me and Haley and Kurt are talking about it. So yeah, you can find me on Twitter at LK Starks, doing more stuff here at Silent Podcasts, of course. Then you can find me on the thing that they banned, TikTok.
9 months. We got 9 months.
At LaTonya K Starks. And then you can find me on Instagram at Stormborn1222. Yeah, I am going to be posting some videos pretty soon from the Top Chef thingy. So, yeah, that's what I'm doing. That's what's going on with me. Thank you so much for listening or watching or whatever you did. I am very excited for this podcast to continue. So we hope that you will listen and subscribe and do all of the things. Naomi, this was wonderful.
This is so much fun. Thank you for listening, everybody. We are going to pop out now. Thank you for listening to Silent Podcasts. Have a great rest of whatever time of day it is. Bye.